Okay, so the June 2025 meeting of the Faculty Advisory Committee. Hi, all. Let's begin with approval of the minutes from April. They were emailed to everybody yesterday again, so
I move to approve.
great. Do we have a second? Has everyone had a chance to review?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion, modifications, anything? They were pretty concise because our meeting was pretty concise.
It was a concise meeting.
It sure was. All right. Any objections? Any no's to approving? Okay. Any abstentions? Okay. So those minutes are approved. Now for the agenda that I just had up. Okay, so approval of the agenda. We have reports of chair and vice chair, a legislative session recap, which I guess I'll just roll into my report kind of. Reserve spending plan, system leadership changes, old new business, and adjournment. And I am hoping, and I've meant to ask, that somebody else would lead the new system leadership changes conversation, because that has been last on my list in terms of attention. But yes, is there anything we need to add, subtract? Any modifications? Okay, so move to approve the agenda. Anyone?
I move.
That's Mark. And second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any objections? Any no? Any abstentions? Okay. All right, reports of chair and vice chair. Brendan, do you want to begin? Only because I realize that the majority of what I have to say is about the legislative session and the reserve spending plan. So, or rather discuss. And I think you might have more substance to the finance stuff than I do, or not. We'll see. So, do you want to begin?
Well, sure. I can. I appreciate that, Kalina, too, because I do need to. I'm kind of mobile right now and need to jump off camera
Gotcha.
at some unpredictable moment. So, there's
Sure.
a few things I wanted to share, in particular with regard to activities by CSU faculty in the interim since our last meeting, as well as throughout the year, starting last July. So the first thing I wanted to share is that representatives from CSU AUP joined the picket lines at Pratt and Whitney a number of weeks ago. It was rainy, but the hot dogs were on the grill. It was the week that Pratt and Whitney was suspending the healthcare benefits of the striking workers. We delivered a gift card for Stop and Shop to the workers on the picket line. And the day after, actually, we were there. Pratt and Whitney signed a TA with the striking workers. So hopefully things are moving in the right direction there. Last weekend, CSU AUP Labor Pride joined the Pride Parade in Middletown, Connecticut for our first time. We had a turnout of about 20. Very important for us to show up in these spaces in today's day and age. The parade was wonderful. The organizers placed us 3 groups in front of the governor, which I found to be quite appropriate. And CT State was right there as well, with I think a lot of turnout from Middlesex. So that was a wonderful moment. It was a rainy day, and it was amazing to see so many people out there for a wonderful event. The other item I wanted to bring out was a shout out to everyone on this committee, all the CSU AUP members who stood up for our students with the legislature and stood up for PACT expansion and a pilot program for PACT expansion so that CT State graduates in that pilot program can move on with debt-free tuition at the CSUs under that pilot program. We did much better in the work towards securing that for students for CSCU than I think anyone expected. And that has to do with people showing up, members, faculty members, SWOF members. I don't know if regents placed phone calls, but it really was a group project, and management joined in the effort. I specifically need to shout out Louise Williams and John O'Connor, who secured a grant from AFT in July and set us on this course. We heard a lot of no's. We heard a lot of the guardrails are in the way, but we actually won it. We got $7.7 million in the second year of the biennial to roll out that pilot project. We are celebrating a great deal because none of us expected that outcome. We were told the best we could do would be a hearing on the bill. This benefits our students. This benefits our campuses. It's really all about how CSCU should operate. Looking forward to working with CT State community members to make sure every student who now has this opportunity has access to it. And really, it was a wonderful way to sort of end the legislative session and to end our efforts with respect to the legislature. Louise Williams and John O'Connor have been invited by AFT to do a national presentation at a national conference at the Summer Institute in Atlanta, Georgia. They will do that in July so that hopefully the lessons we've learned can benefit students in other states as well. And I actually also need to shout out the staff of our union who worked diligently on this project, AFT, obviously, and the Upjohn Institute, which did a very careful analysis of this proposal and were vital in getting it across the finish line, which is some version of the new name of the program. It's called Finish Line Funding or something like that. The last thing I'll say is that from my perspective, the appropriations were perhaps not a surprise. There's wide awareness now of the sort of riches that CSCU can claim to in its reserves. And there seems to be a lot of conversation about spending down those reserves. The legislature perhaps wanting us to do that. There's a willingness to do that. The question is, how will they be spent? And if we're going to prioritize the education of our students, they need to be spent in the classroom, in my opinion. So that's all I have. Thanks for the time, Kalina. I don't know if folks have things they would like to add. I do have some comments about leadership in particular at Southern, because I think there was a little bit of a surprise there recently. But if Mike Shea is here, he might be better positioned to talk about that a little bit, but there's certainly a lot more to talk about, but I'll stop there.
Unfortunately, I just got on. I thank you for Mark for resending that link. And so I missed what you commented on, Brent, that I could talk about. So what's the topic?
Oh, well, we have, I think, on the agenda a discussion of leadership changes, and Southern had one. So I don't know if you want to offer comments about that or not, but that was certainly one of the larger leadership changes.
Yeah, it was. I mean, actually, everything was going really well. We began Diane might want to comment on this too. She's at Southern. But I thought it went really well. The chancellor met with us, the faculty leadership council at Southern, and kind of, worked out, everything we asked for in the search, he agreed to. So that was really great. And that began it in the fall. And the only thing is the outcome at the end was unusual because Dr. Smith, who was the interim president for 2 years, was applying for the job, had been doing a good job for those 2 years. I would say a lot of members of the campus liked him. But then he moved on to the system office and they named another interim because the search failed. And frankly, if it wasn't Dr. D, I'm glad the search failed. I didn't like the other two. So I think it's okay that it's a failed search, but it is weird to have a 2-year interim and now have another interim. So they're going to do another search starting in either the spring, I think in the spring of 26. And I think they're also waiting to have a new chancellor so that the chancellor and the president would make sense. So we don't know the story behind all this yet, why it happened the way it did, but because we know that Dr. D was interested in the job, Dr. Smith. So I'm not sure. I mean, I think we have some inklings, but anyway, I thought the search was actually going well, much better than it did at Eastern. We were happy with the way it was conducted, but just kind of surprised by the outcome. I don't know if that helps. And Diane, she might want to say something too.
I agree with Mike. I think we were all a little surprised that it came to such a sharp end and then a big announcement. I think many people are pleased with who we have as the interim. I just came from another meeting where I heard some rumblings that there's some upset about the process of how the interim was selected, not necessarily the person who's taking the position, but the process of it. And now we're looking at a campus that has an interim provost and an interim president again. So I think that is a bit concerning to a lot of folks who are thinking about the consistency and stability of the university. But like Mike said, it kind of was fast and swift without any explanation. So I don't know that we'll get any. And we'll see. I know the new interim starts July 1st, so.
Actually, Diane, you reminded me of something too, that not only I think are people pretty happy with who's picked as interim, but both our interim provost and our interim president are internal. And
Yeah.
so that felt much better than having an external interim. So, and they were good internal people. They picked, reasonable, effective leaders. So I think, except for the fact that they're interim, it's probably a pretty good leadership team.
Mm.
And just one other thing I wanted to perhaps observe, which is that because I have spoken to one other community member at Southern. When Western had a lot of sort of interimness ongoing, there was sort of a warning flag that went up on behalf of accreditors. So we've had that experience as CSCU. I hope someone has their eye on that. I don't know that it's necessarily an issue here. It may not be. It may not be an equivalent situation, but I did just want to mention that recent experience of one of our other CSU campuses.
Okay. And that's it for you, Brendan? Okay. All right. I feel like so much has happened. Apologies for us having to cancel last month's meeting. And note also that today would have been a joint meeting with the board. I think at the time that we scheduled it, I don't think we appreciated enough, or I certainly didn't appreciate enough how much would be in play right at this moment. The legislative session ended just a little over a week ago. That, figuring out what happened hasn't quite, we haven't discussed it. Not everyone has fully taken it in, processed it. So there's perhaps some benefit to having some time between then and now, right? The announcement of our changes in leadership from the chancellor on down, also brand new. So it does make sense for us to have some conversation before we have a conversation with the board. And I think it's evident also that, those of us who are involved, it tends to be quite overwhelming. And I think you can tell from listening to Brendan's report, it's very hard to see where union activity, legislative activity, and board advisory activity begins and ends. Sometimes they kind of blur into each other and end up sort of dominating our lives. So I want to actually maybe just begin by just putting out there that I think there's a need. There's a couple years ago, and I think, David Blitz really pushed this, and I think we got so much out of it when we did it. We had a couple of study groups that met over the summer to put together a series of reports that we presented to the board, and I think that's some of the best stuff that we've actually done and contributed. I don't know that any of us has it in us to really do that again, but I do think there's a need for a few sort of smaller subcommittee meetings to deal with things that have to do with the actual system itself. Because I think there's so much threat from outside, and there's so much that we deal with in terms of whether it's the public image of our system with all of the bad press that we've had, and then the consequent challenges in getting funding, as a result, that kind of takes, sucks up all the air in the room sometimes. There are a couple of issues, and I want to sort of solicit more input if there are others, that I think are just sort of more directly about how our system functions. One is about, I think there are a number of areas in which there's been concern about management overreach when it comes to, or rather shared governance, right, issues, and the extent to which we have control over our curriculum, whether it's dealing with the push towards over alignment, perhaps, with the newly consolidated college, or in other areas, sort of new, sort of what we used to call TAP. I'm not even sure what we're calling it now, right? TAP FERC, and that being phased out for a new entity, making sure that it does what it needs to do. I'd hope that we'd have some of those conversations back in April, and then and then May happened. So here we are again. Hopefully we'll be able to find a couple of moments to talk about that. We had talked about it briefly before, and it remains to be seen. It seems that a lot of these issues are resolving themselves, or are being resolved with great difficulty and great sacrifice and frustration, because people are pushing in the right direction, but it eventually gets there. And that's wonderful. But I think there's a lot to be learned, if that is true. That may be true. There's a lot to be learned from hearing about those frustrations, understanding the commonalities that we have both at the university level, the college level, and figuring out what we might do to remedy that. Okay, so I know that there were issues that we've talked about at Norwalk. There are issues that the name is escaping me. Who's TAP FERC, the thing that replaced it? Does anyone remember what that thing is called? There are issues with
It's in the
that.
minutes of last April,
Okay.
which I already discarded.
Pardon?
It's something.
Mhm.
This is Jen. I think it's called the Transfer Council.
That
Transfer
sounds-
council, that's it.
Okay, so transfer council, there is still, even though a lot of the work on Acme is moving along, you know, there is still no longer a PA 1240 entity that oversees that, that is largely, you know, elected faculty and staff, etc. So there are many different areas that I think that we can get together and sort of just do a bit of an assessment about whether this is working or not. The system is large, and we're getting more and more centralized, it seems. So I want to propose that, and I will, if anyone wants to jump on it now, great. But I will try to solicit some, you know, participation in these things. And I also, and leadership of these groups. That's not me or Brendan, if at all possible. Yeah, David. Wait, you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Okay, keep messing around with that. And I'm going to mention the other group that I think that we should just a couple of meetings, share our experiences, see if there's something to talk about, right? The other is concerning, yay, the issues of funding and perhaps board structure, right? But funding primarily. I think we're all aware that we need some sort of funding commitment from the state that is tied to something other than simply how much money we got last year or whatever arbitrary amount of money the system office requests, right? And with great pressure from the governor's office and other places that it is not particularly interested in investment in us. But I think most of us feel a little underprepared, overwhelmed by actually meeting the challenge of saying what that might be. I have recently come across some resources, which I will share with you all, and I think we'll start a conversation. And I think that could be another group that we pull together. So I just want to put those out there to say that I think that's work that we need to do because most of our fights are just in keeping this place afloat to begin with. And it's unfortunate. So I want to pull focus back in to what we do and where our specialty lies, right? You know, a lot of us are running around the legislative office building all the time these days, and that's not, I know what I was trained for, not my area of specialty. And yet it's so urgently needed. So, okay, so that's the first thing. I am seeing some yay folks already expressing interest. Does anybody want to just, anything you want to just say in the meeting other than in the chat? And I'm keeping track of this. This is great. Or should I move on now? Okay.
Sorry, Kalina, this is Jen.
Yes.
I will just say that I'm on the Acme English group and I'm on CSET and I've heard their presentation here. I think the missing piece there is the lack of faculty input on data and the small scope of it. And I think that's something that we can push back on. I feel like the Acme committee itself is questioning how long they will stay in a leadership role. And I think that where they're not, in my opinion, pushing back enough is on that data collection piece. So that would be one area that I would think we could keep bringing up as things specifically about the harm, that the potential harm towards underprepared readers and writers who don't have the resources if things don't work out for them. And so there's a lot of, I would say the ethical issues around not collecting adequate data are what I think is an area of focus.
Okay. That sounds good. Okay. So we can just put some of these things together, and I'm glad to hear that. And you know, I will say in relation to that, so one of the recommendations from social impact partners who prepared a sort of a report for the last board meeting, is to mimic certain kinds of programs that you see at CUNY. And so the CUNY, gosh, what is it? Oh, everything's flying out of my head today. But CUNY has a program that sort of tries to get folks through more quickly. And we will be mimicking that, but with special modifications for Connecticut. And there had been concerns. I was certainly concerned, for most of us who are familiar with Robin Israel's work about that program, is that very often, just like what we saw with the report from California a couple of years ago, it is the most vulnerable students who tend to, they don't show up in the data because they just get left out entirely, right? So the data looks good, but they're gone. It was explicit, I think, in the last presentation of that report, that not only would there be specific modifications for Connecticut, but that they will make a great effort to make sure that precisely that does not happen in Connecticut, right? So, I mean, what more can you ask than to say that they have that intention? But I think are participating in making sure that the data collection is adequate to making sure that that is true, will be important. So, yay, right? Great. Anything else before we move on? Yeah, Brendan.
Yeah, just really quickly, I did note that there was a lot of publicity surrounding a different transfer agreement, which was the transfer agreement, I believe, between CT State and University of New Haven. And one thing I know about state contracting is that the State Commission on Human Rights has a role to play in sort of vetting these relationships that state entities have with third parties. And I bring that up because recently University of New Haven was also in the news for signing an agreement with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And actually, I guess they have a long
A
relationship.
long-standing, yeah.
Yeah, with some disturbing discussions in 2018. So I don't know that we necessarily have to connect these dots, but I just was wondering about that part of these agreements for transferring when we are a state entity. So I'll stop there.
Okay. I don't know if anyone else has a comment on that. Okay. All right, so let's see. So at the last board meeting, a sort of reserve, I believe it's a policy, but it just seems to be a proposal for the next 2 years, whatever. But the reserve fund policy, and actually let me find it, it's page 512 of the PDF, is the resolution. And then there isn't a whole lot of detail in the actual agenda packet, but the meeting goes into great detail about how this, what the reserves are, how they got to be where they are, etc. They propose to spend over the next biennium at least $50 million out of the system office reserves over fiscal years 26 and 27. Go ahead, Brendan.
Sorry, old hand.
Oh,
Sorry.
gotcha. And there is a lot of detail there. I recommend just kind of listening to it to get a sense of what's going on there. It starts at 1 hour and 8 minutes into the recording of that last meeting, if you're interested. And then,
Kalina, can I just
Yes.
ask, is it the last meeting of the whole board?
yes,
That was in May, right?
28th, I think it was.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank
Or
you.
20, yeah, something like that.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, May 28th. And then the finance meeting, finance and infrastructure meeting that immediately precedes that has some information also. But I did find the full board meeting to be very, comprehensive. Okay, and then there's the legislative stuff, right? So I think we all knew what we expected to happen. The state legislature didn't propose much more than the governor did in terms of just bare block grant results. It was significantly less than the system asked, and even more significantly less than our constituent unions were asking for. And, I think most of the conversation was about distrust of our system leadership and about the size of our reserves, which people, legislators, everyone couldn't seem to understand. I mean, I think it's really important. I'll say again, I don't think we should be thinking about these things as reserves. It is a consequence of not increasing our block grant over the last many years and simply giving us one-time funds that we've had to hoard those funds that should have been spent in those years, continually reduce expenditures, with deficit mitigation after deficit mitigation. So we are shrinking the system and holding on to money in order to spend it over years where we know that we won't get the one-time funds. And these are the first of those years. So fiscal years 26 and 27, we are now spending down funds that we got. And and those funds were inadequate even then, when we didn't know we wouldn't be spending them and we'd have to spread them over future years. But getting that message across, getting across the message that once we spend down these reserves, we are going to be in a terrible position, that we are looking at, while we are trying to increase enrollment in half to some degree, we are losing full-time, part-time faculty and staff positions all over the place, right? And all of that is in board reports. Brendan, that was a hand up this time, right? New one. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to mention too, I mean, if there were a time in higher education that you would consider to be a rainy day time, it probably would be now.
Right.
So I understand the discomfort of sort of eating the seed corn, as it were. And but in some sense, these are what we think of as a shock absorber, and the shocks are pretty large. Fortunately, our well, we've experienced them, but if you read about what's happening at UConn, it's not unique to us.
Right.
So I just want to put that out there as well.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
yes, yeah, I agree, Kalina. We are not going to be in a place in the near future where we do not need more robust support and investment from the state.
Right. And my concern is mostly about the fact that, first of all, yes, if there's ever a rainy day for us, or an emergency for us, a need to spend this money, it's now. But that's a problem that was created by our state government. Nothing else, right? The funds are there, but they created a mechanism by which the budget cannot grow at the same pace at which we need it. Right. And having not put our increases in the general fund over the last few years, we're significantly behind. So, we're not yet talking about dealing with threats from the federal government. That is not what these reserves were. This is not what we were asked to spend these reserves on. And we're still not quite sure how severe those would be. And there is, so that's my major issue, is simply that there is no solution proposed about what happens after this biennium. There's nothing. and we still have restrictions in place that make it so that they will not be able to budget adequately for us then either. So that's the issue. And it's very interesting that there are a couple of sentiments from the legislature that appear to be at odds. This Finish Line Scholars Program is a really cool thing, and it's, I think, going to be allowing our system to function the way it ought to, at least cost to students. It will encourage alignment between our systems. Students who begin at the community college can end at Charter Oak or at the CSUs. The what we used to call PACT, right? The money follows them, and it's beginning in fall and it ends, I think, it's either 72 credits or whenever they've completed a bachelor's degree. Is that right? So we'll see if that can be what, but that appears to be a way that the legislature is looking to the community college, the universities, to our system, right, to grow. That's a wonderful incentive. And yet at the same time, if we don't have the funding, the staffing, the everything else, the support, the just general lack of chaos available to support these students when they come in, they're not going to make it through, right? So retention is not going to, we're not going to be able to do that. So you see, like, there's an ambivalence there. And it would be really nice to see just a clear sort of direction and the funding to get there from the legislature. I think we're all pretty clear on where the governor stands on us. And I don't think he has anything remotely like a realistic idea of what it means for us to exist or thrive at best. Okay, so the Finish Line Scholars Program is pretty cool. And not only does it have that now, the money following the student, but also, that sounds awful. That sounds like another thing. So, PACT applying to the universities also, and to Charter Oak. But that there'll also be a report that's required to monitor how this is going, how successful it is. And the first report, I think, is due November 1st, 2026, then March 1st, 2027, etc. So each semester. Then there's some other interesting things. There is a new, HB 6887 required a new P card policy, state vehicle use policy, and compliance, policies, which I think the system has already anticipated and to some degree already complied with, right? So we already have the compliance officer, etc. But that is now also in state statute, that is where we need to be. Go ahead, Brendan. Can't hear you. Okay, we'll come back because I can't hear you at the moment. Other things, and this is certainly not a comprehensive list, and I am sort of just idiosyncratically telling you what stood out to me in terms of the legislative report, by the way. Go ahead, Brendan. Let me see if we can hear you now.
Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I did want to just briefly say that I believe the tap was opened slightly. The financial tap was opened slightly from the bond commission. I think it was somewhere around $30 million worth of funding was finally delivered. I don't think it's really necessarily cause to celebrate per se, because I think a lot of that funding is just going to be used to bring our buildings up to code. Again, kind of like you were saying, Kalina, that's not thrive money, that's survive money. And yeah, our students deserve more investment than that.
Mhm.
But at least it is one step in the right direction. As some has said, better is better. But we need to get better still.
Right. And I'm not sure whether that includes there was, I think, like a $6 million dollar amount also that finally got converted from CSU 2020 or something that is now in the account also. So I don't know if that's part of that or in addition to that. But yes, so we finally have some of that money at last. We'll see how far it goes. And then, because remember that the amount that has been approved but not released, right before that 30 million was close to $500 million. So it's a little bit of a fairly large chunk that we should have had. Okay, what else? Okay, so part of this I just found really interesting. So Southern is going to have what do they call the project? I don't know, but it's a place to educate and train social work and law enforcement workforce on how to collaborate. That's a new thing at Southern, established by the legislature. The other is a police training center in crime scene processing at Central. So those two things are supposed to be new or supported by the legislature. And then I think we're all familiar with HEPSAB, Higher Ed Funding Sustainability Advisory Board. Is that it? Something like that. And there are massive amounts of information going from the system to that committee, by the way. If you ever, looked online at the CGA website to see what's there. There's a lot of information. I think the biggest problem for me is that it's so much information that it doesn't function as information for me, because who has the time to look at it all? And that said, one of the modifications to that group that was made this session was that now there is a subcommittee of this group, and it will include, I think it's chair and vice chair of the full board, but also chair and vice chair of the faculty advisory committee or their designees. So Brenda and I or someone. And so the subcommittee, I'll just read this section to you. Oh, I copied the wrong part of it. Darn it. Okay, I'll send it to you all. But really it's about advising on spending and advising on sustainability and on the need for funding. So it's another forum in which we can do that. So I will say that it's not something that we asked for necessarily. It is not, in fact, something that we asked for, but it was included, and hopefully we'll be able to keep up with those masses of information and do something productive there. Okay, so despite my pessimism about the state of our state budget, there was some progress made, right? The biggest issue, I think, in terms of the coalitions of just people concerned about higher ed and every other sort of state agency and service that sustains our students and our, working class population that we serve. The focus was on the state guardrails and making more money available for spending. And at the end of the day, what actually did happen was that very quietly almost, there were modifications to the volatility cap that makes and adjustments as to how that money would be regarded that needed to be signed off on by the governor. And it was that makes about another $600 million available for spending this over the next couple of years, right? So that's actually quite a win. It's not something that I would have foreseen happening without a great fight. It's significantly less than folks were asking for, but it is still significant. And as a result, we have that early childhood, fund. We have other little areas that also will benefit us all and our students, that have seen some investment. So, the key will be to keep that moving in that direction. The other thing that we can keep in mind is that once we have made an assessment of where we actually stand at our our current funding levels, et cetera, there is also going to most likely be a special session this year to deal with whatever craziness comes from the federal level. So there is still room for a certain amount of advocacy and conversation to keep us going, whether it's, addressing an emergency in that special session or in the next legislative session. I think we need to keep our eyes on this and really get a sense of, what its real effects are, and keep advocating, because I think everybody in the state knows that higher ed really took a hit this session, and we're going to need a plan going forward. So I think that's it as far as, yeah, we talked about P card, executive, yep. I think that's it for me. Anything?
The only other thing I might just bring up for the group is that we should hear about a new interim chancellor by July. So that process is still underway, apparently. But that is out there, and that's important. So stop there.
Is there anything else that you wanted? So I think that was my legislative session recap, really. Yeah. And then the reserve spending plan, is there anything more you'd like to say at the moment, Brendan? Because if so, if not, we've gone to.
Yeah, just some brief responses to management's characterization of reserves. It's my professional opinion that we have way more flexibility in spending those than is often portrayed. And I think we should all keep that in mind. And I was a little concerned with the way the benchmarking was done, particularly for the CSUs. They benchmarked reserve holdings with master's granting institutions. I'm not sure. We do grant masters at the CSUs, but I'm not sure that's necessarily apples to apples. I didn't say anything in the meeting, but we have benchmarks of peer institutions that have been sort of agreed to in other venues, and just choosing master's granting institutions is a little bit. I don't think that was the best way to do that. So that was the only other thing I had.
Okay. And can I ask, when you say there's a little bit more flexibility, are you talking about maybe just what's considered designated, what isn't, or are you talking about the ways that we can spend the money? Like what do you have in mind?
Well, I guess what I'll say is that if you think about our campuses as essentially like a money funnel, you kind of have the money coming in from tuition and the money coming in from the state, and at that point, those funds can be used, without limit. And then, yeah, the issue is that, in my opinion, there's been too much pessimism about the financial picture. So we did not spend adequately in the classroom
Mhm.
and in student services. And so there's these leftover piles of money every year. But what happens is when they get sort of set aside, then we start writing rules about how those dollars can be used.
Okay.
But those are our rules, right? If you
Mhm.
read the official audited statements for our campuses, they describe this as unrestricted net position. Well, when people start describing something that's unrestricted as restricted, I start to get a little bit worried.
Mhm.
So I just don't think we should accept the notion at its face that there are limitations on how these monies are used,
Mhm.
because we write those limitations.
Mhm. Okay.
So, yeah.
Right. And then to that point, when I say, I do think it's worth listening to the discussion on these reserves in that last board meeting on the May 28th, starting at an hour and 8 minutes in, because, you know, a lot of those details are a little bit more of those details than has been discussed before is discussed there. It is interesting what's in that pot, and then the continuing sort of discussion of, you know, how restricted it actually is and what's designated and what's not. Okay. All right. So that gets us through item 5. The next is system leadership changes. And as I mentioned, this is I just really hope for some input from folks who were involved in terms of, you know, how the process of those searches, the outcome of those searches. You know, I know that it was quite a lift at the community colleges, and that was some concern. It's a lot of work for those involved. I can report that my understanding is that Gateway is quite happy with the outcome, you know, and that's a lovely position to be in. We're a grouchy bunch, and so it's saying something that I think we're kind of excited for a fresh start. Gateway has not had leadership that's lasted more than a year or two in over 8 years, certainly. So it's time, and hopefully that'll happen. Anyone else? I know we already heard from Mike, I think, about the search at Southern and its abrupt end, but you're happy with the interim. So that's great. Though I sympathize with the interim after interim type situation. Anyone else, especially from the community colleges, the community college, sorry, in terms of how those searches went, any feedback on that? Any concerns? We're finally at the point of having our shared leader model. Kat, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm over at Manchester. Our faculty and staff, their primary concern going into it was the speed at which it happened.
Mhm.
I haven't talked to many folks who are necessarily upset with the outcome, right? I think we're very excited by the candidate that we selected.
Mhm.
I know I personally am. But it seemed to happen at in an industry where change generally like requires an act of Congress to finally happen. This seemed to very much move at warp speed, um, which our campus found frustrating, I'm going to say. And then the other big issue, you know, the primary concern for folks at Manchester is we are still wondering how and why we got paired with Asnuntuck and Middlesex.
Mhm.
We are a large campus. I looked at the numbers recently, and you know, it's generally it's Gateway, it's Norwalk, and then we are somewhere general. We are right now third with population, And I think that's a significant concern for our campus is I could maybe understand like vicinity wise, like being with Capital, right? An easy drive up, but how this one person is supposed to adequately provide leadership for 3 campuses that are pretty far away from each other, right? On any given day, when you 3 campuses 5 days a week, I think is going to be an interesting lift for Dr. Moon coming in.
Yeah,
So time will tell.
we'll see.
Yeah,
Three very different kinds of communities too. So it's interesting.
very, very different kinds of communities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I'll just say at Gateway, I am concerned only because once Manchester links up with 2 other campuses, like you better not claim to be the oh my God, right? It's us.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, and of course, as we like to do in higher ed, we've now they've come up with this terrible acronym, the MAMA. I'm embarrassed to even say it out loud. It's just, I can't because
Mama?
because it's Manchester, MA, Middlesex as non-tuck. See, I can't even say it out loud. I can't take it seriously.
We love doing these things.
I'm like, you guys, let's do better. So we'll see. Time will tell. He doesn't come on until August 8th. Also, I think there is definitely some concern there. But I know he's coming. I think that's just a logistical issue based on when he could start. But we all know how August is at the community college. So
Cool.
buckle up because it's fast and furious. So
Gateway flagship for
Yeah.
life. Okay. All right. Anything else? I know that there's some consistency at like Three Rivers. You've got and at Norwalk. You've held on to your leaders, but anything else? Okay. All right. Old or new business? I have just a couple things. I'll just reiterate. Really, actually, going to try to get those 2 little subgroups going by email once we get out of here. We've already have some, volunteers to participate in, or folks who are interested in doing this. So let's get those together. And David, I saw your suggestions in the chat. And the other is that we'll have to make sure to motivate community college elections as soon as the fall semester begins. We didn't quite catch it at the end of spring. So I will be sending out a little Google form for everyone to share their governance leaders to make sure that we get that done well. Anyone else? Old, new, good and welfare, whatever. Okie doke. Here we go. Anyone?
Good job, Kalina. That was a lot of really important information in both your report and your legislative report. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks. It's like a lot. All right. We're good? See you next month. And I'll send some fun stuff to read too.